The Admiral's tactical implant began running urgent calculations. How could they have obtained such detailed information? His ship's security systems were military-grade, impossible to breach without detection, yet the humans were displaying structural details that even his own junior officers wouldn't have access to. The next slide made his circulatory system run cold. It showed a timeline spanning 50 Earth years, marked with the arrival dates of 17 different Zephyrian scouting missions, missions that were supposed to have been completely covert, missions that his own government had classified at the highest levels. "Oh yes, we've been watching your people for decades," Dr. Martinez continued pleasantly. "Your scouts are quite thorough, but they follow very predictable patterns. Always the same approach vectors, always the same surveillance protocols, always the same behavioral analysis frameworks. We learned to spot your reconnaissance operations within the first few years." The Admiral's mind reeled as the implications became clear. Every piece of intelligence the Zephyrian Empire had gathered about humanity had been gathered while humanity was simultaneously gathering intelligence about them. But how had these primitives managed to detect advanced cloaking, technology that had fooled dozens of other species? Dr. Martinez seemed to read his thoughts. "You're wondering about our detection methods. The answer is surprisingly simple. We weren't looking for your technology. We were looking for the gaps it created. Every cloaking system leaves a signature. Admiral, it's not what you can see, but what you can't see that gives you away." The presentation continued with a detailed analysis of Zephyrian conquest patterns. The humans had mapped out the Empire's expansion over the past 2 centuries, identifying recurring strategies, common tactical approaches, and predictable behavioral patterns. They had studied the fate of 17 different species that had fallen to Zephyrian conquest, documenting the methods and aftermath of each campaign. "Your species has a remarkable consistency in your approach to conquest," Dr. Martinez observed. "You always establish the same orbital positions for maximum psychological impact. You always begin with the same demonstration of superior firepower. You always offer the same terms of conditional surrender. It's almost like you're following a manual." Admiral Krixvos realized with growing horror that they were. The Zephyrian Military Academy had indeed codified these approaches into standard operating procedures, refined over centuries of successful conquest. What had seemed like proven methodology now appeared as dangerous predictability. The true scope of the trap became clear as Dr. Martinez began revealing the extent of human preparation. Those primitive nuclear power facilities, scattered across the planet, weren't just generating electricity. They were weapons platforms capable of being reconfigured into directed energy weapons within hours. The communication networks that seemed so simple were actually sophisticated sensor arrays, constantly analyzing and categorizing every piece of Zephyrian technology within their range. "We needed galactic-level technology," Dr. Martinez explained matter-of-factly. "Our own development timeline would have taken centuries to reach your level naturally, but we also needed to ensure that whoever provided us with that technology would be cooperative partners rather than conquerors." The Admiral watched in stunned silence as the screens around the chamber began displaying real-time feeds from facilities across Earth. Underground manufacturing complexes that had been producing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize Zephyrian advantages. Research stations where human scientists were already reverse engineering captured Zephyrian equipment. Testing facilities where new hybrid technologies combining human innovation with alien engineering were being developed. "The beautiful thing about your conquest strategy," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that it requires you to bring your most advanced technology directly to us. Your flagship alone contains more technological advancement than our entire civilization could have developed independently in the next 1,000 years. Admiral Krixvos finally understood the full scope of what had happened. The humans hadn't been preparing to surrender. They had been preparing to acquire. Every moment of apparent vulnerability had been carefully calculated to encourage the Zephyrians to reveal more of their capabilities. Every act of seeming desperation had been designed to make the Admiral overconfident and careless. "You see, Admiral," Dr. Martinez said with that same warm smile, "you weren't conquering us. We were adopting you. And now that you're here in our solar system, surrounded by our technology and our preparations, We can begin the real negotiation. The Admiral's combat computer finally provided the analysis he had been dreading. His fleet was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and completely outmatched. The humans had used his own predictability against him, turning his strength into weakness and his confidence into vulnerability. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the realization that the humans weren't planning to destroy the Zephyrian fleet. They were planning to keep it, and they were planning to keep him too. Dr. Martinez gestured toward a chair that had been prepared at the front of the assembly. "Now then, Admiral, shall we discuss the terms of our partnership? We have so much to learn from each other, and we have all the time in the world to figure it out." As Admiral Krixvos walked toward that chair, he understood that he was no longer a conqueror. He had become exactly what the humans needed him to be, a resource to be managed, studied, and ultimately absorbed into something far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen before. The Admiral settled into the specially constructed chair that had been provided for his larger frame, expecting to hear the usual requests for mercy, offers of tribute, or attempts to negotiate better terms for the planet's population. Instead, Dr. Park activated a holographic display system that immediately caught his attention with its sophisticated technology. What appeared on the screens froze the Admiral's circulatory system completely. The presentation began with detailed schematics of Zephyrian technology, but these weren't the crude external scans that primitive species typically manage to obtain. These were internal technical specifications, complete engineering diagrams, and operational manuals that should have been impossible for any outside force to acquire. "We've been monitoring your species for quite some time," Dr. Park explained, in the same pleasant conversational tone she might use to discuss weather patterns or cultural exchange programs. "Your conquest patterns are remarkably consistent across different campaigns. You always choose the same 3 orbital positions for maximum psychological impact. You always deploy the same intimidation protocols. You always expect the same fear response from target populations." She clicked to the next display, which showed detailed analysis of Zephyrian military tactics spanning dozens of previous conquests. The humans had somehow obtained records of campaigns that had taken place years before Earth had even been selected as a target. "It makes you wonderfully predictable," Dr. Park continued, her smile carrying implications that made the Admiral's species-specific danger instincts begin screaming warnings. "Once we understood your patterns, preparing for your arrival became much more straightforward." The Admiral's tactical computer, which had been struggling with error messages for days, finally provided the analysis he had been dreading. Every data point it processed confirmed the same terrifying conclusion. Humanity had been preparing for this invasion for decades. Every piece of seemingly primitive technology was actually camouflaged advanced systems. Every act of welcome had been carefully orchestrated intelligence gathering. Every moment of apparent vulnerability had been calculated preparation. "You see," Dr. Park continued, advancing to displays that showed the true scope of human preparation, "we've been waiting for someone exactly like you. We needed a species that was technologically advanced enough to be useful to us, but also predictable enough in their behavior patterns to be manageable once they arrived." The implications of her words were becoming increasingly clear, and they painted a picture that inverted everything the Admiral thought he understood about the situation. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by the invasion. They had been expecting it, planning for it, and preparing to turn it to their advantage. "We needed access to galactic technology and knowledge," Dr. Park explained, "but we also needed to ensure that whoever provided it would be cooperative in their approach to sharing that information." As she spoke, the screens around the chamber began displaying images that revealed the true nature of Earth's supposedly primitive infrastructure. Nuclear power plants that were reconfiguring themselves into energy weapons systems, communication arrays that had been scanning and analyzing Zephyrian technology since the moment the fleet had arrived in Earth's solar system, underground facilities that had been manufacturing countermeasures and defensive systems for the past 3 days straight. The Admiral watched in growing horror as seemingly innocent civilian installations revealed hidden capabilities that matched or exceeded anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. The humans had built their entire technological infrastructure as a camouflaged military system. hiding advanced capabilities behind facades of primitive development. Every piece of information you've shared with us, Dr. Park continued, every efficiency improvement we've suggested, every friendly interaction between your soldiers and our civilians has been part of a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. We now have complete technical specifications for your ships, your weapons, your communication systems, and your tactical doctrines. She paused to let this information sink in before delivering what the Admiral was beginning to understand would be the final revelation. The trap, Dr. Park announced with a smile that triggered every evolutionary warning system the Admiral's species had developed over millions of years of evolution, is that you're not conquering us. We're adopting you. The word adopting carried implications that went far beyond simple military defeat or political surrender. It suggested a relationship where the Zephyrians would find themselves incorporated into human civilization, not as conquerors, but as something closer to children who had been taken in by a family that intended to raise them properly. Admiral Krixvos realized that his fleet, his empire, and quite possibly his entire species had just encountered something far more sophisticated and dangerous than any military force they had ever faced. The humans had turned the entire concept of conquest inside out, creating a situation where the act of invasion had actually delivered the Zephyrian Empire directly into human hands. The most terrifying part was that his soldiers were already emotionally compromised by days of human hospitality and friendship. Even if he ordered an immediate withdrawal, he wasn't sure his own crews would obey commands that would mean abandoning their new human friends and the most positive military experience any of them had ever had. The moment Admiral Krixvos received the official invitation from the United Nations, he felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, these primitive beings were ready to accept their fate. The golden scroll that arrived on his flagship was written in perfect Zephyrian script, which surprised him slightly, but he dismissed it as simple translation technology. What he didn't realize was that this invitation was the final piece of a puzzle that had been decades in the making. The Admiral spent 3 full rotations preparing his victory speech. He would be magnanimous, of course. These humans had fought bravely for primitives, and he would acknowledge that before explaining their new role as a client species. His advisors suggested bringing a full honor guard, but Krixvos decided to attend with just his personal retinue. After all, what threat could a defeated species possibly pose during their own surrender ceremony? The UN headquarters building looked exactly as primitive as expected. Simple glass and steel construction, nothing like the crystalline spires of Zephyrian architecture. The Admiral's scanner showed no advanced technology, no hidden weapons, no energy signatures beyond basic electrical systems. Even the security seemed laughably inadequate, just a few guards with what appeared to be chemical projectile weapons. But as Admiral Krixvos entered the General Assembly Hall, something felt wrong. The atmosphere was too calm, too controlled. The human delegates weren't showing the proper deference. They looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read, not fear, not anger, but something that made his combat instincts twitch uncomfortably. The human representative who approached him was unremarkable by any galactic standard. A middle-aged female with graying hair and simple clothing. She introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Martinez, director of something called the Interspecies Relations Department. The Admiral had never heard of such a department, which struck him as odd since his intelligence reports had been quite thorough. Dr. Martinez gestured toward the main podium with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Admiral, we're so pleased you could join us today. We have quite a presentation prepared." Her voice carried no trace of the defeat or desperation he expected from a conquered species. Instead, she sounded almost excited. The lights dimmed as the presentation began, and Admiral Krixvos felt his world shift on its axis. The first slide showed a perfect 3-dimensional model of his flagship. Not just the exterior, but detailed internal schematics showing every corridor, every system, every security protocol. The level of detail was impossible. These weren't the rough approximations you might get from external scanning, but precise technical specifications that could only come from someone with intimate knowledge of Zephyrian engineering. "We've been studying your vessels for quite some time now," Dr. Martinez explained conversationally. "Your engineers follow very standardized designs. It's actually quite efficient, though it does make your technology rather predictable once you understand the underlying principles." Even more disturbing were the psychological reports coming in from field units. Zephyrian soldiers, trained for decades in maintaining professional distance from conquered populations, were returning from routine missions with human contact information saved in their personal devices. They carried containers of something called teok boki that humans had insisted they try. Some of them had been invited to dinner with human families and were actually considering accepting. "Sir," reported the ship's morale officer, a position that had never been particularly important during previous conquests. "Troop morale is reaching dangerously high levels. The soldiers are reporting that humans are surprisingly friendly and eager to learn about galactic civilization. Several have requested extended assignments on Earth specifically to continue their cultural exchanges with local populations." This was the opposite of what should have been happening. Successful planetary conquests required maintaining clear psychological barriers between occupying forces and local populations. The Zephyrian military had developed extensive protocols for preventing exactly this kind of fraternization, but those protocols assumed that conquered peoples would be hostile, fearful, or at least resentful. "We've also received a formal invitation from their United Nations," the communications officer added, consulting her latest batch of messages. "They want to schedule what they're calling integration discussions to explore humanity's potential contributions to your empire. They've prepared presentation materials about Earth's resources, technological capabilities, and cultural offerings." Admiral Crixvos felt something that might have been the beginning of genuine concern. In his experience, conquered civilizations didn't prepare presentation materials for their conquerors. They didn't offer suggestions for improving invasion efficiency. They certainly didn't invite occupying forces to dinner or provide detailed intelligence about their own military capabilities. The Admiral's tactical brain, honed through years of successful military campaigns, began processing a possibility that was far more terrifying than any conventional resistance could have been. What if this wasn't incompetence or naivety on humanity's part? What if this was actually strategy? He activated his personal workstation and pulled up humanity's historical files, data that had previously been deemed irrelevant to the conquest planning. The Zephyrian intelligence services had focused primarily on military capabilities, technological levels, and population distribution. They had paid little attention to behavioral patterns or cultural analysis, assuming that all species would respond to superior force in predictable ways. But as the Admiral reviewed the historical data, disturbing patterns began to emerge. This species had survived multiple ice ages that should have driven them to extinction. They had endured plagues that had decimated their populations repeatedly. They had fought world wars that should have destroyed their civilization entirely. They had even survived something called social media, which appeared to have been a particularly challenging test of species-wide sanity. More importantly, they had documented consistent patterns of turning enemies into allies through methods that seemed to bypass traditional military thinking entirely. Their history was filled with examples of apparent defeats that had somehow become strategic advantages, of overwhelming enemies who had eventually become trading partners, allies, or even integrated members of human societies. "Computer," the Admiral commanded, his voice carrying new urgency. "Run a comprehensive strategic analysis assuming that human behavior is tactical rather than naive. Recalculate all threat assessments based on the possibility that their responses are deliberate rather than accidental." The computer processed this request for several minutes, its advanced analysis systems working through scenarios that had never been programmed into standard conquest protocols. When the results appeared on the Admiral's screen, they sent a chill through his exoskeleton that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. If humanity's response was strategic rather than simply incompetent, then every helpful action represented sophisticated intelligence gathering. Every welcome gesture was actually a form of psychological warfare designed to undermine the invading force's cohesion and purpose. Every moment of apparent superiority that the Zephyrians had enjoyed was actually humanity choosing not to reveal their true capabilities. The analysis suggested that humans had spent the past 3 days systematically gathering detailed information about Zephyrian technology, military protocols, and individual psychology. They had identified key personnel, established personal relationships with soldiers and officers, and created emotional connections that would make future hostile actions increasingly difficult to justify or execute. Most terrifyingly, they had accomplished all of this while making the invading force feel grateful for the experience. Admiral Krix Voss stared at the tactical display showing Earth's defensive capabilities, wondering for the first time since the invasion began whether he was looking at accurate information or carefully crafted misinformation designed to make him underestimate the true scope of what he was facing. The thought occurred to him that if humans were capable of this level of strategic sophistication, then the Zephyrian Empire might have just encountered something far more dangerous than any military force they had ever faced, a species that could turn conquest into friendship so effectively that the conquerors would end up working for the conquered without even realizing it had happened. The moment of truth arrived when Admiral Krix Voss decided to accept the United Nations' formal invitation to address their General Assembly. He had received similar invitations on other conquered worlds, opportunities to deliver terms of surrender to defeated populations while demonstrating the futility of resistance. It was a standard part of the conquest protocol, designed to formalize the transition from independent civilization to imperial territory. The Admiral prepared his usual speech about the benefits of joining the Zephyrian Empire, the consequences of continued resistance, and the generous terms being offered to those who cooperated fully with the new administration. He had delivered variations of this presentation 47 times before, always to audiences of terrified or resigned leaders who understood that their world's fate had already been decided. But as he entered the General Assembly Hall in New York, something felt different. The atmosphere wasn't charged with the fear and desperation he had come to expect from conquered peoples. Instead, there was an air of anticipation, almost excitement, as if the assembled representatives were looking forward to what was about to happen. The human representative who greeted him was a small woman who introduced herself as Dr. Minji Park, a specialist in what she called interspecies diplomatic relations. Her demeanor was professional and confident, showing none of the submissive respect that typically characterized interactions with conquered populations. She spoke to him as if they were colleagues meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement rather than conqueror and conquered. "Admiral Krix Voss," Dr. Park began, "thank you for accepting our invitation. We have a presentation prepared that we believe will be of great interest to you and your command staff." "Say, Tupi, we've been waiting for you," the child announced cheerfully, looking up at the towering alien commander with the kind of innocent excitement usually reserved for meeting a favorite movie character. The child held up the paper, which turned out to be a crayon drawing of what was unmistakably meant to be Thexnol's ship, complete with flames shooting from the engines and little stick figures waving from the windows. Along with the drawing, the child offered something called a cookie, a small round food item that smelled of sugar and vanilla. The gesture was clearly meant as a gift, presented with the kind of generous enthusiasm that children show when sharing their most prized possessions. "Hyunwoo says you're probably here to help us reach the stars," the child continued, referring to what was apparently an adult who had been explaining the situation to the younger humans. "Are you going to teach us how to build spaceships? Can you show us other planets? Do you have any alien animals we can meet?" Commander Thexnol, veteran of 47 planetary conquests, found his extensive psychological warfare training completely useless against humans who were asking for photographs and autographs. His intimidation tactics, which had been perfected through years of successful campaigns, simply didn't translate to dealing with people who wanted to pose for pictures with him and ask questions about his technology. The crowd began organizing itself into lines, apparently expecting some kind of meet-and-greet session. Parents coached their children on polite ways to interact with the aliens. Elderly humans shared stories about how they had always believed this day would come. Scientists in the crowd began taking notes and measurements, not of defensive positions or escape routes, but of alien technology they hoped to learn from. Meanwhile, high above the planet's surface, Admiral Krixvos was receiving increasingly bewildering reports from his command ship. The invasion was proceeding according to the established timeline, but the human responses were unlike anything in the galactic military database. When the alien fleet had disabled Earth's communication satellites as a demonstration of technological superiority, the planet's governments had issued statements thanking them for forcing global cooperation and helping humanity work together during this historic moment. Instead of panicking about their lost communications, humans had begun coordinating through backup systems and seemed genuinely pleased about the opportunity to practice emergency protocols they had been developing for years. The demonstration of superior firepower had gone equally wrong. When the aliens vaporized a large asteroid near Earth's moon to show their destructive capabilities, humans had responded with enthusiastic applause and detailed requests for energy readings. Scientists across the planet wanted to study the weapon's power output to help with their clean energy research. Environmental groups issued statements praising the aliens for choosing a target that wouldn't harm Earth's ecosystem. "Sir," the Admiral's intelligence officer reported, his voice carrying the confusion of someone trying to make sense of completely unprecedented data, "we've intercepted their transmissions. They believe we're here to solve climate change, unite their species, and guide them toward advanced space travel. They've prepared what they're calling welcome packages, containing food items with names like kimchi and bulgogi." The intelligence officer paused, consulting his readings with growing bewilderment. "They've also organized what appears to be a cultural exchange program. Multiple human institutions are offering to teach us about Earth's history, art, and science in exchange for information about galactic civilization. Several universities have already prepared dormitory space for visiting alien students." Admiral Krixvos stared at his tactical displays, which were showing error messages as the computer systems tried to process human behavior that fell completely outside their programming parameters. The invasion algorithms couldn't calculate appropriate responses to a population that was treating conquest as an opportunity for friendship and cultural exchange. The Admiral's tactical computer, designed to analyze military threats and calculate optimal strategies for planetary subjugation, began displaying error messages as it tried to process the unprecedented situation. Its databases contained information about thousands of different species and their typical responses to superior force, but none of its scenarios included populations that responded to invasion by offering cookies and requesting science lessons. The chart? Machine learning systems that should have been predicting human resistance patterns instead found themselves trying to categorize activities like welcome party planning and interspecies friendship protocols. The computer's threat assessment algorithms kept returning results that suggested the humans were more dangerous to the invasion force's emotional well-being than to their physical safety. 3 days had passed since what should have been the swift beginning of Earth's conquest, and Admiral Krixvos found himself staring at reports that made no sense according to every military manual he had ever studied. The humans hadn't just failed to mount any meaningful resistance against the invasion force. They were actively making the entire process more efficient and pleasant for everyone involved. The Admiral's command center, normally a hub of tactical coordination and strategic planning during planetary conquests, had instead become something resembling a customer service department. His communication officers were fielding requests from humans who wanted to schedule tours of the alien ships. His logistics teams were receiving detailed suggestions for improving supply chain efficiency. His intelligence analysts were overwhelmed with voluntary information sharing from Earth's governments and civilian organizations. "Admiral," his chief engineer reported, approaching the command station with the bewildered expression that had become common among the crew over the past few days, "the humans have identified 12 major inefficiencies in our standard landing protocols and provided detailed suggestions for improvement." The engineer consulted his datapad, clearly struggling to process what he was reading. A human engineer named Jin Ho accessed our publicly available technical specifications and cross-referenced them with Earth's infrastructure databases. He provided us with detailed maps of every major city, including the locations of military installations, power grids, and transportation networks. Admiral Krixvos paused in his review of status reports. That's classified military intelligence. Did we extract this information through interrogation? No, sir. He volunteered it during what he called a transparency meeting for building trust between our peoples. He also included recommendations for optimal landing sites that would minimize disruption to civilian populations and maximize operational efficiency for our forces. The situation was becoming more surreal by the hour. Traditional military wisdom suggested that conquered populations would either fight desperately to defend their territory or surrender in terror when faced with overwhelming force. Humans appeared to be doing neither. Instead, they were approaching the invasion as if it were a collaborative project that required their active participation to succeed. Admiral Krixvos stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger on the main screen. His massive Zephyrian fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace, and he felt that familiar thrill of another easy conquest. The planet looked so small, so helpless floating there in the darkness of space. His four eyes scanned the tactical displays showing Earth's pathetic defenses. A few rusty satellites drifted around the planet like forgotten toys. No massive space. Stations bristling with weapons. No energy barriers protecting the atmosphere. No sign that these creatures even knew how to fight a real war among the stars. "What do we have down there?" Krixvos asked his tactical officer, already knowing the answer would be disappointing. "Scan complete, Admiral," came the reply. "The planet holds about 8 billion creatures that call themselves humans. They're stuck on their little world, never even figured out how to travel faster than light. Their best weapons are still those ancient projectile things that shoot metal bits really fast. Some basic nuclear bombs too, but nothing that could scratch our hull plating." The Admiral's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his people. After 300 years of sweeping across the galaxy, crushing world after world, he'd learned to spot easy targets. Primitive civilizations always followed the same pattern. First, they'd try to fight with their toys. Then, they'd beg for mercy. Finally, they'd surrender and hand over everything valuable on their planet. This Earth place would be cleared out and ready for resource extraction before his next meal, maybe even sooner if these humans were smart enough to give up without a fight. "Begin the usual process," he commanded, settling back into his command throne. "Knock out their communication systems first. Can't have them coordinating any defense attempts. Then we show them what real firepower looks like. A few demonstrations should convince them to surrender peacefully." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. They'd done this dance hundreds of times before. Disable the enemy's ability to talk to each other. Show off superior technology. Watch them panic and fall apart. Accept their surrender and start the harvest. But something strange happened as the Zephyrian warships began their descent through Earth's atmosphere. The Admiral expected to see cities going dark as their communications failed. He expected emergency broadcasts and military mobilization. He expected the usual chaos that came when a primitive world realized it was being invaded. Instead, something completely different appeared on the screens. Crowds of humans were gathering in the streets, but they weren't running away screaming. They were pointing up at the sky and seemed almost happy. Their faces showed excitement rather than terror. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, sounding confused. "We're getting flooded with transmissions from the planet's surface. Thousands of them." "Surrender demands already?" Krixvos asked, though something felt off about the whole situation. "No, sir, that's the weird part. They're not begging for mercy or threatening us. They're actually inviting us to come down and meet them. Look at this." The main screen switched to show intercepted human broadcasts. News anchors were talking excitedly about first contact and a new chapter for humanity. Social media feeds showed people celebrating in the streets, holding up signs with messages like "Welcome to Earth" and "We've been waiting for you." One transmission caught the Admiral's attention. A human child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was speaking directly into a camera. "Hi, alien friends. My name is Ji-hoon and I drew you a picture of your cool spaceships. I hope you like pizza because my mum is making extra for when you come visit us." The Admiral's secondary brain, the one responsible for tactical analysis, started sending warning signals. This wasn't normal behavior for a species under invasion. In 3 centuries of conquest, he'd never seen anything like it. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've been monitoring their global communications. They seem to think we're here to help them. Many of their leaders are talking about how this will unite their world and solve their problems. They're treating this like some kind of rescue mission." Krixvos felt his confidence waver slightly. Every world they'd conquered had responded with fear, anger, or desperation. But these humans seemed genuinely excited about being invaded. It didn't make sense. "Maybe they're just too primitive to understand what's happening," he muttered to himself. "Run a deeper scan. Check their military capabilities again and find out why they're acting so strange." The results came back quickly, and they only added to his confusion. The humans definitely understood that alien ships had arrived. Their scientists were already trying to analyze the energy signatures from the Zephyrian vessels. Their military leaders were aware of the situation, but weren't mobilizing for war. Instead, they seemed to be preparing for some kind of celebration. Commander Thex Knoll had conquered 47 worlds in his military career. He knew exactly how first contact scenarios were supposed to unfold. The landing party would establish a defensive perimeter, demonstrate superior firepower, and wait for the inevitable surrender of the terrified local population. It was a process he had refined through decades of successful planetary subjugation. But as his transport descended toward what the humans called Soul Plaza, nothing was going according to plan. Instead of fleeing in panic or cowering behind military barricades, thousands of humans had gathered in the large public square. They weren't carrying weapons or shields. They were holding colorful signs, banners, and what appeared to be celebratory decorations. The commander's tactical display showed readings he had never encountered before. Where he expected to detect fear pheromones and stress hormones typical of a population under invasion, his sensors instead registered excitement, curiosity, and something his computer identified as festive anticipation. The atmospheric analysis suggested that the humans had been preparing for some kind of celebration rather than defending against an attack. As the alien landing craft touched down in the center of the plaza, the crowd's reaction defied every military manual Thex Knoll had ever studied. Instead of screaming and running away, the humans began cheering and applauding. They held up signs reading "Welcome to Earth" and "Finally" in multiple languages. Some of them were taking pictures with small handheld devices, as if documenting a historic moment they had been eagerly awaiting. The commander emerged from his ship wearing full combat armor and carrying weapons designed to intimidate entire populations into submission. His appearance had been carefully calculated to project overwhelming military superiority. His species was naturally larger and more imposing than most humanoids, and his technology amplified that advantage with sleek, threatening-looking equipment that had never failed to inspire appropriate levels of terror. But the humans reacted as if he was some kind of celebrity making a special appearance at their event. They pressed forward eagerly, trying to get closer looks at his armor and equipment. Parents lifted small children onto their shoulders for better views. Teenagers held up their devices to capture images and videos that they immediately began sharing with others who weren't present. What happened next completely shattered the commander's understanding of proper invasion protocol. A small human child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, broke free from the crowd and approached him without any sign of fear. The child was clutching what appeared to be a piece of paper and some kind of food item.